Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Thomas. I'm the Safety, Health, Environment Director at William Hare and Chairman for this panel discussion entitled How to Achieve the Holy Grail, No More Working at Height Accidents Ever. And with us today are experts representing a number of organisations which the Access Industry Forum believes are meeting together for the first time. Certainly to discuss work at height issues. So it's my pleasure to introduce, perhaps from left to right, John Holden, who's the immediate past president of IOSH, Joy Jones, Principal Inspector, Construction Sector, Health and Safety Executive, Barry Holt, who's Director of Policy and Research at the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, Roger Bibbings, who is an Occupational Safety Advisor with RoSPA, Nigel Bryson, who is from Bryson Consulting and representing the British Safety Council, and finally Peter Bennett, who is the Chairman of the Access Industry Forum and Managing Director of PASMA. So I suspect there's a lot to talk about in 45 minutes, and I'll endeavour to make a little bit of time available at the end for questions from the floor. But beneath the title of How to Achieve the Holy Grail is the question, will the continuing developments in safety and work at height best practice ever deliver zero incidents and accidents? If yes, then are we taking the quickest route to achieve this? And if no, then i.e. they won't eliminate falls from height, then why not? So perhaps bearing in mind some of the things that Jason said to us in the previous presentation, I can ask one of the panellists, who I shall pick at random, but can we deliver zero work at height accidents and incidents? So Barry, do you want to kick off?
One of the things that I noticed that struck home with Jason's presentation was when he said that he was so embarrassed at saying that he'd fallen 10 feet from a ladder and that the ladder hadn't been secured. And that sort of made me think about one of the issues that is very dear to my heart, and that's that you can only go so far with actually improving, developing the hardware that's associated with the job. You still have the imponderable, which is the person doing the job. And a good example I saw recently on a construction site was the project was to build an extension to a company's staff restaurant, single story, and the height of the roof was about 12 feet off the ground. There were two guys on there. Both of them sort of were working. One of them did have fall arrest equipment on. The other had nothing at all. No PPE, no fall arrest equipment. But the interesting thing was the guy who had the fall arrest equipment had his lanyard adjusted so that it had probably hit the floor about 2 seconds before it took the strain. And the only good thing that came out of that was the chief exec of the company went to see for himself what was happening, and apparently nobody knew his command of language was what it was. But until you actually provide not just simply training, but education to people so that they actually understand the risks, not just that it's a set of rules, I think we've got a problem, and that is probably one of the biggest barriers we've got to achieving this Holy Grail.
So perhaps broadly around the topic of communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Joy, HSE being examined from all angles these days, what initiatives are HSE running with at the moment to try and improve falls from height?
Well, people will be aware of the Shattered Lives campaign, which is still running in the background. The materials are available to people to continue using, because obviously it's a lot more than just HSE promoting these messages. The Construction Industry Advisory Committee is a body that draws from the industry itself. It includes worker representation and employer representation, and also regulators. There is a safety working group that is charged looking particularly at work at height accidents. And that group has studied statistics, it's drawn people from the industry who have their own experience which they bring to the table. And the main conclusion that we've drawn is that the construction industry particularly has made huge advances in the last 15 to 20 years in particular areas of work. Some examples are steel erection and roofing, where practices, equipment, all of those things have changed, and on larger organised sites particularly, that's pretty well controlled. But the stubborn problem area is not something that is going to give rise to quick wins. There are no obvious trends, no obvious trades, no obvious activities beyond the fact that the deaths and the major injuries seem most to be occurring on smaller jobs, shorter jobs, smaller firms, where people are using inappropriate equipment or doing nothing at all. That's why we think we don't have any quick wins. That's why the group has drawn the conclusion that what we need to do is look at a very long-term strategy, 25 years or so, with the goal of trying to make working at height without precautions as socially unacceptable as drinking and driving. People still drink and drive, but they're far less likely to than they were years ago, and that's come about through a combination of education, information and enforcement. There's no single thing that's actually taken us to that position, and that's the process that we're beginning now to try to establish what we can do, who we need to help us, how we can actually get to that overall goal. And key to achieving that is to forget the barrier that normally exists between DIY type activities and work, because it's an artificial barrier, and if we want to make it socially unacceptable, we've got to get everybody on board, understanding the risks and taking proper controls. We need to start people young, we need to start right at the very beginning. One member of the group said, why don't we start with Humpty Dumpty? And I must admit, I've never thought of that as a work at height accident, but it is. That's what we need to do. HSE can't do it alone. Society has to tackle this problem.
So 25 years is an ambitious programme. Nigel, what is it that British Safety Council can bring to that forum?
I think really, that's if I'm plugged in, by the way. Are we okay yet? Am I on?
No.
Thank you very much. I think I cannot hear very well, so I'm doubling up on the microphones. I think first of all, I do accept what Joy is saying, that we've got to look at the issue in the longer term. So if you like, from the British Safety Council point of view, one of the things that's been working on quite intensively over the last few years has been trying to get the concepts of risks and hazards into schools. And we've had a programme running for some time now to raise awareness there, so that we actually start not by putting the fear of God into children, but actually trying to get a calculated view about protecting themselves and protecting other people. And I know that the other organisations on health and safety are doing very similar things themselves. So that's one thing to try and build for the future. I think the second thing is actually to spend more time getting the workforce themselves involved with the control measures and the equipment that's going to apply. My own particular area of expertise is employee involvement. And the number of times that I'm listening to people who have a process where the worker is at the end of a process. And it seems to me one of the steps that we should be taking is to have a much more fundamental change and make the worker, or make the workforce, first of all, central to the development of an organisation in relation to health and safety, but also get more of them more directly involved in the development of equipment and processes. Because I was involved with an initiative some years ago where a number of companies actually asked their customers, I don't know which microphone's working now, can't hear whether I'm being heard or not, actually got them directly involved in the design of the equipment. So if I'm going to be involved with that, then it's more likely that the equipment will be more responsive to the people and the conditions who are going to operate them. Quite often they're at the end of the process. And what you're saying to people who are under pressure is you figure out how to raise a mobile elevated platform. You figure out how to get the ladder into place. So part of the approach, it seems to me, that Joy was talking about, and this is not a quick fix, is to actually get the workforce themselves much more involved with both the working practices, but also the design and the use of the equipment that you're going to be used. And we've been involved with some of that in the British Safety Council as well. The final point I think that in this area is I think that we can solve this problem, but it's a longer term issue. And the minute that you say that we can never design out a problem means that you've stopped looking. And if I go back 10 years to the equipment, to mobile elevator platforms, the practices, the deaths that result from falls from a height, it's a different story today, and part of it is actually looking around some of the equipment in this hall now. So it seems to me that it's part of an ongoing process, it's a longer term process, and one of the key steps is to bring young ones forward and get the concepts of risk and hazard into their minds so that they are not tolerant of the things that our forefathers and fathers and possibly ourselves were when we started work, and actually get workforce much more involved with the design of processes and equipment that they themselves are going to be involved with.
Thank you. Roger, competence is a key area for work at height. What needs to be done to improve individual competence and perhaps corporate competence in work at height issues?
I think the key competence, I think, in this is actually leadership. It's about leading an organisation safely. It's about creating expectations. And obviously there are lots of technical competencies to be mastered in working at height, whether you're designing equipment or whether you're erecting and testing scaffolding or whether you're training people to work on it or use protective measures. But I think the key underlying competence that we've got to get across is leadership. And I'll make a slightly political point here. Leadership starts at the top. I had a series of useful conversations with Lord Young of Grafham, who was asked by the Prime Minister to carry out a review of health and safety. And he said several times, and I think he even repeated it in the House of Lords, you can't prevent all accidents. So I took him to task and I said, which accidents can't you prevent? And we didn't get very far in this conversation. But what was unhelpful was that he was not showing the leadership which we would expect from senior figures, that actually the vast majority of accidents that we have are preventable by reasonably practicable measures, not by outlandish measures, not by over-the-top measures, but by very simple things. So we've got to, the first thing that leaders have got to do, and I don't just mean directors and managers, but I mean team leaders, supervisors, middle managers, is that actually we don't have to have accidents. Accidents can be prevented. So that's, I think, a key, you can call it a competence, but being able to communicate and inspire people with that idea is absolutely fundamental. But I want to go back again on this theme of the soft skills, the competence in the soft skills rather than technical skills, which lie at the root of this. I absolutely agree with everything Nigel said about making health and safety management worker focus. And just to give a little illustration of that, we've been doing some research for a new award that we're making making today in the RoSPA Awards to trade associations that have done great things. And in the course of this, I came across an excellent piece of work by the Mineral Products Association, who've done a piece of work very much worker-centred on safer by design. So they've gone to the workforce and said, where is it unsafe to access vehicles and equipment, for example? They looked at all sorts of other things as well, and collated all this near-hit information, all these suggestions, and taken it back to the association with the weight of the major corporates in the mineral sector, back to the manufacturers of equipment, much of which is like millions of pounds items of equipment, and said, we want these safety provisions installed by design, so we can design out a lot of the exposure, including work at height, which doesn't need to be there. So when people say to you, well, we've exhausted all the technological, all the design solutions, it's all now down to behaviour, I don't buy that. I actually think for a significant fraction of the work which is still going on out there, a lot more can be done to improve design. So my second area of competence would be, let's get back at those architects and designers, let's put them in touch with the workforce, the people who really understand what the exposures are, what the issues are, and see if we can't wake up the architects and the designers a bit more to come up with some cleverer solutions which do help meet the primary duty, which, as you know, is to avoid working at height in the first place.
Thank you. Just perhaps John, moving from Lord Young to going back a few years, Lord Hunt attended this event 5 years ago, 2006. He was the then Minister with responsibility for health and safety, and he said if we can improve our knowledge, we are all better able to do our bit in keeping the working population healthy, happy and in work. So what should we all be doing, perhaps from an IOSH perspective?
Okay, really I'll probably end up repeating a lot of what's already been said before. The key thing, I mean, from a safety practitioner point of view, is making sure we're up to date with what's going on with legislation, technology, whatever is available. Because what a safety practitioner is going to have to do is tap into the leadership bit that Roger mentioned and look to persuade, cajole, bully, do whatever to those people to make them get on board to do whatever is necessary. I'd also suggest that further than that, going back to what Nigel said, that it's so often that you see where planning has gone into doing a job, where you've seen people undertake risk assessments, produce method statements and so on, but the people at the sharp end doing the work never ever see them. They don't see anything of it. So when you ask the question, if there's been an incident, what information were you given, it's very often nothing. So information is knowledge, key things. But I think it's about us keeping up to date with what's going on and putting that into practice. We've already mentioned there's so much equipment available these days for work at height. We seem to have a solution for pretty well everything. And you look at the cost of some of this, if you've got to hire it in, purchase it or what have you, you know, it's not actually massively expensive, very reasonable. And when you compare that to damaging a person, then I think very cost effective.
And Peter, you've brought together a number of trade associations over the years. What are the current things that you're looking at to prevent further injury and from work at height?
I think the first thing I would say that is echoing something we said previously. We have to believe that the Holy Grail is attainable. If we don't believe it's attainable, we shouldn't be starting off looking for it. Logic tells us that it is attainable. Logic tells us that there are not very many accidents, if any at all, that could not have been avoided. What we are seeing and what we're seeing in, for instance, in a panel such as this, is joined up thinking, different organisations collaborating, comparing notes and agreeing on the best way forward. And that joined up thinking is a theme that we are implementing quite extensively. We heard the speakers yesterday talking about how designers are now being brought into this, and it should be as early as the design stage. Designers are now working on a code of practice to design for work at height safety. We need to ensure that clients understand their responsibility, that there is a cost involved in building into the design methods to reduce the need to work at height, and where work at height is essential, that there is a cost involved in making that safe. We're also working in a collaborative way between the work at height industry sectors and other sectors to understand this issue of that we don't particularly want it to be a situation where there is a prescriptive method applied, where certain types of work or certain groups of workers are advised, this is how you will do this work at height, you will always use this equipment. The important thing is that there should be a toolbox available, there should be a selection of worker height equipment methods, and that there should be skilled and competent direction, management, supervision, and the workforce who are competent to be able to make the correct selection. We won't achieve this instantly. However, we have, as has been said before, we have come forward quite a considerable way. And what we need to do is we need to ratchet up on those improvements. We need to encourage innovation. We need to encourage improvement in the state of art. But along the way as well, we also need to be very careful that we avoid displacement of risk and unintended consequences of change. In attempting to resolve one problem, we actually create a problem somewhere else, and it's important that we try and avoid that. And that, from my point of view and from our point of view, is achieved by being really quite careful in how we review innovation and how we implement it and how we can accept it into the proper method of working at height. We want to embrace innovation, we want to embrace improvements in the state of the art, but we also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If we already have good worker height practices in place, we need to make sure that we don't move from one idea to the other latest idea just because it happens to be the new thing. Another important point that we are pushing quite hard, and I know Joy has mentioned before, in Cognac we've been mentioning this. In order to achieve our goal, it's important that we know and we understand the problem, the extent of the problem, and the root causes. We have, through AIF, been trying to influence the review of RIDOR to see if we can maybe come up with some better information on root causes of falls from height. We do know, however, that it's probably a useful tool in that, but there's a good deal of underreporting. And particularly that underreporting is in that sector that Joy referred to previously, which is the most difficult sector for us to get to. All of the people that are here, all of the organisations that are here, are already tuned into it and are already well aware of the considerable risks in working at height. The ones who don't know and the ones who are oblivious to it and who are cost-driven are those who are one-man type operations, householders working on their own behalf and working at height. And really the challenge for us is to get this message becoming as important to them as it is to those who are involved in wider industry. It's not going to be easy for us to do it, and we need to really come up with some innovative methods of doing that. Joy mentioned it previously about we want to get to the situation where it becomes socially unacceptable. And that's possible. I mean, it's not that long ago, and I remember when I first came into industry, it was perfectly acceptable for the sales guys to head to the pub on a Friday, have a few drinks, drive up the road, and if they were caught drink driving, that was pretty bad luck. Now that's totally unacceptable. I was explaining to somebody last night, and we've managed this as well, fairly well. I'm a smoker, right? And now, in the space of a very short period of time, it becomes socially unacceptable for people to smoke in public places, to the extent that I really find it quite difficult to understand how patterns and habits can change so quickly. So it can be done. There's no doubt about it that it can be done. But we just need to build on what we have already, the achievements we've already made, and take it further forward.
Training, perhaps in common with all safety training, is obviously important, but it depends very much on the quality of the training provider, the syllabus, the way it's delivered. There's a lot of work at height training out there. Some of my chaps on site have wallets thick with cards for different pieces of equipment and so on. Is the work at height training that's out there fit for purpose? Is there too much? Is there gaps? Is it fit for purpose? Let's go down the line. John.
I'll just see if this is working, so we're all right. I've got to say, I'm to some extent, I'm encouraged by a lot of smaller businesses that I see who will tell me quite openly about PASMA, IPAF, and so that is positive in terms of they've heard of these organisations, they've been on the training courses, so that's pretty good. I think it's the same with everything else that we've mentioned. If you're talking about big construction companies, if you're talking about subcontractors working for big construction companies, because of the constraints, if you like, that are placed on them, they know that they've got to turn up properly trained to do the job, properly trained to use the equipment. That's fine. It's the what you might call the invisible sector, away from construction perhaps, looking at the maintenance, the cleaning activities, and these sort of things, where people will just use whatever equipment's available, regardless of whether they've been trained or not. I think the training is there. It's there to meet the demand, but it's about people's awareness of it. It's a 5-minute job, it's a short duration job. Do I need to be trained? If you get the situation, do you need to be trained for watering a plant? And the reason I ask this is that I actually dealt with an accident, a work at height accident, where somebody broke the wrist watering a plant. It was on top of a cupboard that was 6 foot in the air, and they climbed on top of a chair that they wheeled from behind the desk, and as soon as they stood on it, the thing swiveled, and off they fell and broke the wrist. So I think there is still a large element of people not understanding what is work at height when they're at risk, and therefore whether they should be doing that or not, and if they should, is the training out there.
So Joy, in terms of training, you mentioned earlier a lot of things are happening on smaller sites and smaller contractors. What is HSE doing there to try and get training through to those smaller providers?
Well, HSE and certainly the construction division has changed its construction programme to put much more emphasis on inspecting small sites. We're trying to free up some resource from what we do with the larger organised part of the industry and devote that to the smaller sites who don't get looked at for health and safety at all. And in inspecting those sites, we will actually make judgments about how well the site's being managed, whether there are issues about competence and training, and where those may be revealing themselves in inadequate risk control on site. Then the inspector will be offering advice and may well be taking enforcement action to get sites to reach a certain level of basic training. But the reality check in all of this is, even when we look at the small sites, the ones that may or may not have notified to HSE, we're still missing a huge chunk, the invisible part of the industry, with the short jobs, the very small jobs. The only time we come across the vast majority of those is when we're investigating fatal accidents.
Harry?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key issues. The size of the job, the size of the site, the size of the companies. Where you've got a major project, you're going to have supervision, checks all down the line. So you've got the principal contractors will be checking that certain standards are being met. But when you've got just a small company doing a short-term job, there's going to be a great temptation to just ignore the training, which might actually take longer than the job. And it cannot, even if you do go to the training, it can become a tick box exercise. Oh yeah, we've got to have this. Right, we've done it. And we see that in so many other industries as well, this tick box approach. And that's what actually does worry me about the training. There's a lot of good training out there. Sort of contractors need to sort of know what's the good training, what isn't, and they also need to be aware of the need to effectively enforce their standards.
Roger?
Try and make this work. Yes, I'd very much agree with that. I think we need to really declare war on the tick boxers in this sort of field and get people to understand that procuring training or advice or the things you need to make your business run safely requires quite a bit of thought, and you need to get people to think, well, what training do people need for different kinds of jobs at different points in their career progression and so on. So I think we need to avoid the tick in the box, one size fits all, think very clearly about individuals' training needs. But come back to the point about the majority of about 50 fatal injuries a year, as I understand it, due to falls. And if you look at the HSE website, there was a big rise in the major injuries about 2 years ago. I think it's up at about 9,000. It suddenly jumps from 9,000 to 11,000. Don't know why that is, but we know about underreporting. But there are many more serious injuries, and I suspect that many occur in what one might call pretty non-standard environments. They're not all construction related. They're related to maintenance activity, and some of them quite bizarre. The basic training we need to get across to people is that you need very little height to gain an acceleration that will create a lethal energy and lead to major trauma. I still think, isn't it the average height of fatal falls is still under 20 feet or something like that? So you don't need very much energy. And I don't know whether it's probably already been done, but in road safety some years ago, there was a movement to teach people about the case for wearing seat belts, and people who did exceed the speed limit were put on an inclined plane strapped into a chair and then brought to a sudden stop from 30 miles an hour, and it was said that this traumatic experience made people realise that actually a seatbelt was a very good thing to wear. I'm not suggesting that we drop people from height or little height just to sort of remind them that, but my instincts tell me that we probably need to do a lot more very basic awareness training with people about the hazard of working at very moderate heights, and that could probably pay greater dividends in some ways than some of this repetitious training that goes on just to tick the box.
Nigel.
I'll try and see if I've got the microphone working. I think we're okay. There's really 2 points. I mean, the first thing was that in coming to this event, I looked at the construction enforcement intensive inspections, and out of the last batch that was done, there were 735 enforcement notice issued. 55% of them were unsafe working in height. So whatever training is going on, it doesn't appear to be working in those situations. I think the second thing is that we would just like to see actually more creative types of training. Because it seems to me that one of the problems, particularly for experienced workers, if I take experience in the construction sector, is being told something that they've already known for 20 years. They didn't like it. People don't like that. Yet at the same time, we have the most sophisticated communications devices and approaches that we've ever had in our history. Now, I've worked with a company in Spain that with a mass of photographs can reproduce anybody's workplace on a computer screen and allow you to move around that computer screen in 3 dimensions. But the main training for construction skills safety card is to press a touch screen and answer yes, no questions. Now, it seems to me that we do need a rethink to make the best use of the communications and the training that we have, and that we need to be much more strategic in our thinking. Because, and I'll finish on this point, all too often, when you're looking particularly in these kind of small jobs, the small entrepreneurial areas, everything is ratcheted down. Everything. So training isn't seen as a strategic option for the benefit of our future. It's a rotten big cost that we don't want, so we will minimize. And so long as we can get somebody to give us the training at the end of it, that doesn't matter what the training is, so long as we can say we've got them trained. And it seems to me that there is an area where we could actually pull together. And again, I'll come back to my favorite theme, is that actually if we engage more with people doing the work to see what training works for them, working with somebody new is a different approach, I would argue, to somebody who's experienced but coming onto a new site. You need different approaches. And I think my criticism kind of underneath is there's too much of one training will fit all. And I think we need to be much more subtle about the way that we actually train people and get them to be more interactive about the training that they feel they need with the skills that they've got, as well as what your needs are.
Thank you. I'm going to say Peter to the end for the final question. So is there any, we've got time just quickly for perhaps 1 or 2 questions from the floor if anybody has some issues they want to raise to the with the panelists. Anybody want to raise a question? No? Very shy? Well, we'll move on then. Peter, this is the, I think the first time these respective organisations have met to discuss work at height.
Yep.
So, I know we can go back down the line. So what are you going to do together in the next 25 years?
Well, I think that, as you say, by virtue of the fact that this is the first time these organisations have come together on one platform, this is pretty much evidence of the joined-up thinking that we've been speaking about before. And that joined-up thinking is becoming more and more evident in the engagement across the work at height sector, in particular through Access Industry Forum. And because Access Industry Forum is able to speak for the work at height sector from one end to the other, it also makes it a much more representative voice when speaking to other industry sectors. And we would expect, and we are already putting into place, the development of collaboration with industry sectors to understand the issues and to promote this idea, this concept of three-dimensional competence in work at height. Looking at, you know, from one end of the scale to the other, from ladders and step ladders all the way through to mobile access towers, aerial platforms, rope access, the whole gamut of options that are available, and to basically engage with other sectors to look at it from the point of view of, we tend to be thinking in terms of we want to make sure that whoever is using the equipment and whoever's actually making use of it is competent, and we're pretty good at concentrating on, let's make sure that they have the skills. What we tend to miss out on, though, is for the person who is making the decision, for the manager or the director who is deciding what is the most appropriate method of obtaining work at height, we've tended to neglect that a little bit. And we want to engage with other industry sectors to look at an industry, a work at height sector, wider qualification, a manager type qualification, which will equip managers and directors to be able to know which is the most appropriate type of equipment, when that equipment is in use, or when that work at height method is in use, that they have effective methods, experience and competence to manage its use, and rather differently from the current situation, as I say, which tends to be user focused and tends to be on the basis that, you know, we've decided this is what you're going to use, now you get on and use it and be safe out there.
Joy, because I don't think I'm going to get down the line in the time available.
So from an IOSH perspective, what we will continue to do is things like lobbying the government to ensure that health and safety is important, it's high profile, and it's a key part of every business. It's an important business function. We all know that while there's a cost to implementing health and safety, the cost of failure is that much bigger. And when it comes to loss of life, quite frankly, you can't quantify it.
Joy?
Fundamentally, for me, this is not about training, it's not about equipment, it's about everything. What we need to get to, working together, is why people don't take precautions and why they hurt themselves. In all the accidents I've investigated over a great number of years, I have never come across anybody who deliberately set out to hurt himself. Usually, there's one of two reasons. Didn't know, or didn't care, or they're somewhere in between, and that's what we really need to get to. We need to make working at height safely, attractive and easy to do.
Barry?
It was interesting actually recently being involved with the OSHA sort of development, because we actually found that on this particular issue, all the organisations were able to work together to a common end. And I think to actually sort of move that further, I think this would be an opportunity for all the parties here, who've probably all got expertise, but perhaps slightly different sort of constituencies, to actually pool their ideas and at a particular problem.
Well, I'd certainly agree that we all need to work together as coordinated health and safety effort, and It's not being rude about our colleagues in HSE, because I think they're great and I love them to bits, and always will do. But the point is, they're under pressure, and if we're going to fill the gap in health and safety that's been left by a 33% cut in their resources, then certainly the education, the awareness raising and so on has got to be undertaken by the safety organisations. And we're not the troops from Ormington-on-Sea, you know, I mean, we are real people, we know what we're talking about. There's a serious point I would like to make, though, about learning, and that is, this is part of the mix. I think we need to revalue the whole business of learning from accidents and incidents, particularly incidents. We're going through a revision of RIDDOR at the moment, which is a bit narrow in my view. We need to look at the whole thing again. A key theme in this has got to be that when we have unsafe acts, unsafe conditions, near hits, when things have gone wrong and people haven't luckily been injured, that's the time to learn, to get people together, and people learn much more by actually looking in on an accident. I know it's difficult, people feel blamed and all this sort of thing, but learning from accidents and incidents, learning from incidents particularly, has got to become a much stronger part of everybody's education.
And finally, Nigel.
Yes, I'll just finish. I mean, from the British Safety Council's point of view, that it's got young training going on, it's targeted particular areas, construction is one, and it's published a number of case studies about successful stories in relation to the prevention of accidents and ill health. So I'd like really to come back to something that Roger mentioned when he talked about the Mineral Products Association. Yes, all the organisations, I think, have got to be collaborative, and we need a focus, and you carry the expertise in relation to access for heights. And one of the things that has struck me over the years is actually their best practice website. Because on their website, this is simply for quarries, of course, which has defined itself out. You can register freely, you can go onto it, and there's a whole series of different areas which include falls, which includes worker involvement, manual handling, equipment, a whole series of different areas, where over the years they have collected examples from their award system, and now any company that can put examples forward into those different grouping areas. So if I look at manual handling, for example, there's over 137 examples of what quarrying companies have done on manual handling in their quarries. You can look at the others and it's all there. They've linked it into a CPD system for anybody that comes on. They can track how long they've been on the website and put that towards their continual professional development. They've got member companies now sending in materials of toolbox talks, presentations. I'm linked into it, so I keep getting safety alerts virtually every week about incidents, not all accidents, but incidents that other people might learn from. And it seems to me that with your expertise here, opening up some of the routes with the different bodies that we've got here, with a work at height focus, you can bring together an effort that would help us to be able to get to our members and your message into a bigger, wider audience. And it seems to me that that might be if you like, a technical route to try and get some of this information into one place to make it available to a bigger audience, because you've already got a good website.
I think that's probably a good place to finish. Just to thank the panellists, and perhaps just to use a part of the national forward to BS 8437 to conclude as we think about how we achieve our quest for the Holy Grail. And it's a warning. Perhaps quite stark with what Jason said to us earlier, that those who work at height should never forget that gravity is no respecter of persons. It affects everyone, too many times with disastrous consequences resulting in serious permanent injuries or death. So thank you for coming, and have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought there were some good ideas, particularly focusing on how it's people's behaviours that can be a big influencer.
It was very good, very informative. Yeah. And I'll be thinking about the things they discussed and seeing if I can put them into my practice.